Asterisk. I was peacefully enjoying my morning coffee when I heard it, that dreaded sharp throat clearing from the sidewalk. I looked up, and there she was. Clipboard in hand, lips pursed, eyes locked onto my mailbox like it had personally insulted her. Then she said the words that would change everything. Asterisk. This is a violation. That was the moment I realized I had just become Karen's next target. What started as a petty HOA complaint quickly spiraled into the most insane neighborhood battle ever. Fake rules. Midnight inspections. Even a 911 call because she thought I was too young to own a house. And in the end, Karen got exactly what she deserved. Buckle up. You're about to witness the ultimate HOA showdown. Hello, beautiful peoples. Before we dive in, let me know. Where are you watching this from? Tell us in the comments and subscribe. It was a quiet, sunny morning in the neighborhood, the kind of day where birds chirped, kids rode their bikes, and the occasional dog barked in the distance. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. That was until she appeared, clipboard in hand, lips pursed, eyes scanning the street like a security camera on high alert. I had just moved in a few months ago, still settling into the whole homeowner thing. It was a big step, buying my first house, and I was proud of it. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the front porch had a couple of potted plants, and my welcome mat had a simple hello written on it. Harmless. Or so I thought. Then came Karen. She walked up my driveway with the authority of a general inspecting the troops, stopping short of saluting herself in the reflection of my windows. I barely had time to process what was happening before she cleared her throat with the intensity of someone about to deliver a life-altering announcement. "Excuse me," she said in that tone. The one that made it clear she wasn't really asking. I turned, coffee cup in hand, half expecting a friendly introduction. Instead, she was staring at my mailbox like it had personally offended her. She motioned toward it with her clipboard. "This is a violation." I blinked. A violation of what? She exhaled sharply, as if I had just asked why water was wet. "The HOA guidelines," she declared. "That mailbox is exactly 1 inch too high." I almost laughed. 1 inch? But Karen was not laughing. In fact, she looked like she had just caught me committing a felony. She scribbled something onto her notepad, then flipped through her papers with the kind of seriousness usually reserved for courtroom trials. I took a slow sip of my coffee, considering my options. I could argue. I could ignore her. Or I could do what I ultimately did, nod and say, interesting. Karen did not like that response. Her lips pressed together so tightly they nearly disappeared. She adjusted her stance, tapping the clipboard against her arm. I could tell she was waiting for me to cave, to beg for mercy or apologize profusely for my alleged crime against the neighborhood aesthetic. When I didn't, she made an exaggerated note in her paperwork, muttering something about a formal complaint. That was my first run-in with her. The first of many. And as I would soon learn in Karen's world, no offense was too small, no rule too petty, and no act of defiance too insignificant to warrant immediate action. Karen was nothing if not persistent. If her first warning about the mailbox was a warning shot, what followed was a full-fledged campaign. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was inventing them, wielding her clipboard like a medieval scepter, determined to shape the neighborhood into her own personal utopia. The next encounter came just days later. I had stepped outside to water my plants, enjoying the morning sun, when I heard it, the dreaded ahem. That sharp, deliberate throat-clearing designed to command attention. I turned to find Karen standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, eyes locked onto the ground as if she had just discovered a buried crime scene. "There's a leaf," she announced. I blinked. "A what?" She pointed, and sure enough, there it was. A single, sad, brown leaf resting on the edge of my driveway. It must have drifted over from one of the trees nearby. "This is how it starts," she said, shaking her head, as if I had left an old mattress on my lawn and declared it a modern art installation. One leaf turns into two, then suddenly we have a mess. A jungle. I looked around, wondering if anyone else was witnessing this absurdity. Was this a prank? Was there a hidden camera somewhere? "Right. I'll take care of it," I said, reaching down, grabbing the leaf, and flicking it toward the grass. Karen remained unmoved, lips pursed, eyes narrowed. "This is your official warning." "My official warning?" She nodded gravely, making another dramatic note on her clipboard. "We have rules, and I expect everyone to follow them." With that, she spun on her heel and marched away, satisfied with another battle won in her self-appointed war against imperfection. From that day forward, Karen's patrols became more frequent. It was as if she had installed an invisible alarm that went off anytime something in my yard offended her sensibilities. One day, it was the shade of my front door. Too bold, she claimed. Another day, it was my recycling bin being visible from the street. You'll need to move that, she informed me, tapping her clipboard for emphasis. It's an eyesore. It's recycling, I pointed out. It gets picked up tomorrow. She sniffed. Still, it should be out of view at all times. There was no winning. The rules weren't just about order, they were about control. Karen had appointed herself the gatekeeper of the community, and anyone who dared to exist outside of her rigid expectations was public enemy number one. But what really set things off, the moment that turned this from an annoying feud into a full-blown war, was when she saw my friend pull into my driveway. It was a Friday afternoon, and a buddy of mine, Jake, had stopped by to check out the place. He was in his late 20s, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, and driving a perfectly normal car. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just a guy coming to visit a friend. Karen, however, saw something else. I was inside grabbing drinks when I heard the voices outside. I stepped back out onto the porch to see Karen standing way too close to Jake's car, arms folded, inspecting it like a crime scene investigator. Is there a problem? I asked, stepping down the stairs. Karen turned, expression a mix of suspicion and indignation. Is this your visitor? I frowned. Yeah, he's a friend. She pursed her lips. Well, he's been parked here for more than 5 minutes. I glanced at the driveway. Yeah? That's how visiting works. Karen's eyes narrowed. We have rules about guest parking. No, we don't. She straightened. Well, we should. At this point, Jake was staring at her, half amused, half bewildered. Is this normal? He asked me under his breath. For Karen? Yeah, I muttered. Karen wasn't done. You look young, she said, turning her attention to Jake. Are you even supposed to be here? Jake raised an eyebrow. I don't know, am I? She turned back to me. I just think it's suspicious. A young man, unfamiliar to the neighborhood, arriving at your house. I let out a dry laugh. Karen, I live here. Her expression didn't change. How do I know that? And that's when I realized she didn't actually believe I belonged here. The mailbox, the recycling bin, the leaf. It was never about those things. It was about me. She had decided, for whatever reason, that I was too young to be a homeowner, and in her world, that simply did not compute. Jake, sensing the absurdity of the moment, pulled out his phone. Should I call the cops on myself? Karen's eyes flicked to his phone, and for a split second, I saw hesitation. Then she straightened, plastered on that fake HOA authority face, and with a huff, she turned on her heel. This isn't over, she declared, stomping away. And for once, she was right. Karen had officially crossed the line. It was no longer about HOA rules or even her obsession with control. She had made it personal. The way she had questioned whether I even belonged in my own home was enough to turn mild irritation into something else, determination. But I wasn't about to go full scorched earth. Not yet. No, this called for something better. A game. If Karen wanted a battle of wills, I was more than happy to play. The first step? Testing the limits of her patience. I didn't break any rules. I just started following them too well. The recycling bin? I made sure it was out of sight, but only just barely, strategically placing it 1 inch behind a bush, knowing it would drive her insane. The lawn? I mowed it to the exact HOA specifications, down to the last blade of grass. If she wanted precision, she was going to get it. So much so that I even took a ruler outside one afternoon, making a big show of measuring my own grass, just in case she was watching. Which of course she was. The mailbox? I had it adjusted to the correct height, but I also added a tiny, barely noticeable sticker to the side that read, "Officially Karen approved." Small things. Little acts of defiance that weren't actually defiance, but just enough to let her know that I wasn't rolling over. And she hated it. I could see it in the way she hovered at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, foot tapping, itching to find something to complain about. But there was nothing, and that's what drove her crazy. But then she escalated. It started with official HOA notices. First, a letter in my mailbox about a supposed non-compliant flower pot. Then, a second one about the color of my porch light. They were clearly targeted, nitpicky things that nobody else was getting called out for. At first, I thought she was bluffing, that she was just writing these up herself. But no, she had actually convinced the HOA to send them, which meant she was taking this fight indoors to the meetings. So I did the only reasonable thing. I started attending them too. The first time I walked in, Karen's face practically froze. She had clearly not expected me to show up, much less take an interest in the rules she had been wielding as a weapon. But I wasn't just there to listen. I was there to participate. Quick question, I asked, raising my hand after she brought up yet another complaint about someone not following community standards. Are these rules actually written anywhere? Karen stiffened. Well, they should be. But are they? I pressed. The HOA president, a middle-aged guy who looked exhausted from years of dealing with suburban nonsense, cleared his throat. We do have official guidelines, but some things are up for discussion. I leaned back. Interesting, because I checked, and there's nothing about porch light colors. A few heads turned. Karen's lips tightened. Well, it's an unspoken rule. I grinned. So, not actually a rule, then? Silence. Sweet, sweet silence. That should have been the end of it. I had called her bluff, pointed out the obvious, and theoretically, she should have backed down. But Karen wasn't wired that way. She saw losing as temporary. If she couldn't control me with fake rules, she was going to try something worse. She was going to make my life miserable. Within the next week, I had multiple real HOA complaints filed against me. Nothing major, nothing that would hold up under scrutiny, but enough to be annoying. Suddenly, my approved mailbox was blocking the sidewalk. My car, which had always been parked properly, was now violating street regulations. And somehow my wind chimes were too loud. I could have gone nuclear. Could have made a scene, retaliated harder, turned this into a full-blown war. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I knew something Karen didn't. I knew she was breaking her own rules. And all I had to do was wait. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had a Karen problem. The moment I started attending HOA meetings, something shifted. At first, my presence alone seemed to throw Karen off her game. She was used to controlling things without pushback, but now? Now she had to defend her nonsense in front of an audience. And that's when I noticed it. The neighbors were watching. It started with side glances. A few amused smirks. A couple of folks exchanging knowing looks whenever Karen went on another one of her tirades about community standards. Then came the whispers. After one particularly ridiculous meeting where Karen tried and failed to introduce a rule banning non-traditional mailbox designs, I was approached by Tom, my next-door neighbor. Hey, you got a second? I figured he wanted to warn me about something, but instead, he leaned in conspiratorially. Look, man, we're all sick of her. I blinked. Wait, all? He snorted. You think you're the first one she's harassed? Please. She's been pulling this crap for years. That's when I realized something big. Karen's reign of terror wasn't just my problem. It was a neighborhood-wide epidemic. Tom spilled everything. There was the time she tried to ban Halloween decorations because they were too tacky. The time she accused a retiree of illegal gardening because his flowers were the wrong color. The time she filed a formal complaint against a 12-year-old for riding his bike too fast on the sidewalk. She once told my wife that our curtains were too vibrant, Tom added, shaking his head. What did your wife say? She bought brighter ones. I liked Tom's wife. It wasn't just him. Over the next week, I started having quiet conversations with neighbors. At the mailbox. At the community park. Even at the grocery store. The more I talked, the more stories came out. She fined me for unsightly garbage cans. They were behind a fence. She told my son he wasn't allowed to play basketball in our own driveway. She once measured my grass with a ruler. A ruler. And then there was Linda. Sweet, elderly Linda, who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. She had the best story of them all. She called animal control on my cat. Your cat? Linda nodded gravely. Said he was trespassing in her yard. I tried and failed to contain my laughter. So what happened? Linda smirked. They told her to close her windows. It was beautiful. For years, Karen had been a one-woman HOA dictatorship, and everyone had just learned to deal with it. But now there was a shift. People were tired. People were done. And most importantly, people were ready to fight back. The turning point came when Tom got an HOA violation for his lawn flamingo. Not multiple flamingos. Not a display of them. Just one, a single, innocent plastic flamingo standing proudly in his yard. It's a personal attack, he declared, crossing his arms. That flamingo has been there for years. Linda, ever the instigator, leaned in. You know what would be a shame? Tom raised an eyebrow. What? She grinned. If more flamingos started showing up. And just like that, the rebellion was on. Over the next week, plastic flamingos started popping up all over the neighborhood. At first, it was subtle, one here, one there. But by day 3, it was a movement. Driveways, flower beds, even someone's roof. Karen lost it. She stomped from house to house, clipboard clutched in an iron grip, furiously writing down violations. But it was pointless. She couldn't keep up. I will find out who started this, she fumed at the next HOA meeting, eyes darting around the room. No one spoke. No one even looked guilty. The beauty of it all? I hadn't put up a single flamingo. The neighborhood had done it on their own. Karen had spent years ruling with an iron fist, but now? Now the people had turned against her. And it was only going to get better. Karen was unraveling. The flamingo rebellion had tipped her over the edge, and now, instead of quietly enforcing her nonsense through passive-aggressive notes and HOA violations, she was losing her cool in public. She stormed into HOA meetings like she was presenting evidence in a high-profile trial, binder clutched in one hand, pages filled with infractions that she had personally documented. These are serious violations, she snapped at the HOA board, dramatically slapping the binder onto the table. The HOA president sighed, rubbing his temples. Karen, these are flamingos. Yes, exactly, she said, her voice shrill. Plastic flamingos. They are destroying the uniform aesthetic of our community. The room was silent for a beat. Then Tom coughed. It sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Karen whipped her head toward him. You think this is funny? Tom, ever the master of deadpan, shrugged. A little. Karen's eye twitched. But she wasn't done. If she couldn't win in the HOA meetings, she was going to take the fight directly to the neighborhood. And that's when things got weird. It started with her patrolling the street. Not just her usual clipboard and scowl routine. She was actively searching for violations. She would walk up to houses with a measuring tape, crouch down in yards to inspect grass height, even whip out a leveler to check if mailboxes were perfectly straight. One night, I caught her literally crouched in my front yard, measuring my lawn at midnight. Karen, I called out from my porch. She jumped like a guilty raccoon caught in a trash can, then scrambled to her feet, brushing off imaginary dirt. Just making sure everything is compliant, she stammered, holding up her measuring tape like it was a police badge. I stared at her. At midnight, she huffed, crossing her arms. Rules don't have a time limit. I just shook my head. Karen, go home. She left, but I could tell she wasn't giving up. If anything, she was getting more desperate. And that's when she started calling in complaints. Every single day. The HOA board was getting flooded with reports, all from one person. My neighbor's porch light is too bright at night. Someone left their trash cans out 5 minutes too long. There's a child's bicycle left unattended in a driveway. At one point, she even tried to fine a neighbor for having a bird feeder. That's when the board started pushing back. The HOA president, now visibly exhausted, called a meeting and announced something glorious. We are implementing a review process for complaints, he said, barely concealing his frustration. Going forward, any reported violation must be accompanied by clear evidence and must be based on an actual written rule in the HOA guidelines. Karen's face drained of color. But, no exceptions, Karen, the president said firmly. And just like that, Karen had lost her biggest weapon. But she wasn't done. If she couldn't get the HOA to do her bidding, she was going to escalate things even further. That's when she called 911. I wish I was joking. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was outside washing my car when I saw her pacing on the sidewalk, phone clutched to her ear, talking way too loudly. I don't know if he actually lives here, she was saying. He looks too young to own property. It's very suspicious. I froze, staring at her. Was she seriously calling the cops on me? Oh, she absolutely was. A few minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, looking confused as hell. Is there a problem? One of them asked, glancing between me and Karen. Karen marched toward them, arms flailing. Asterisk yes. Asterisk I have reason to believe he's trespassing. I don't think he actually owns this house. I exhaled slowly, wiping my hands on my towel. I do own this house. The officer turned to me. You got ID? Yeah, of course, I said, heading inside to grab my driver's license and a copy of my mortgage statement. When I handed them over, the officer barely glanced at them before nodding. Well, everything checks out, he said, turning to Karen. Ma'am, he does own this house. Karen gasped, like she had just been personally betrayed. Are you sure? The second officer sighed. Yes, ma'am. You can't just call 911 on someone because you don't like that they live in your neighborhood. Karen opened her mouth to argue, then saw the neighbors watching. Because, oh yeah, everyone had come outside. Tom was standing in his driveway, arms crossed, grinning. Linda was peeking through her curtains, barely containing her laughter. Even the HOA president had wandered outside, shaking his head. Karen knew she had lost. And then, the final nail in the coffin. The officer turned back to me. You know, he said, almost casually, you could file a harassment report. Karen physically recoiled. I just smiled. I think I'll hold off on that for now. The officers left. Karen, red-faced and shaking, stormed back to her house. And the neighborhood? They cheered. Karen disappeared from public view for a few days after the 911 fiasco. The neighborhood had witnessed her most spectacular failure yet, and for the first time, she had no comeback, no snide remarks, no clipboard full of fake infractions to wield like a sword. She had lost. But the best part? Her downfall wasn't just a one-time event. It was ongoing. The damage she had done to herself couldn't be undone. The HOA board, finally pushed to their limits, started taking action. At the next meeting, the HOA president cleared his throat and made an announcement that had the entire room holding back laughter. We've received numerous complaints regarding excessive and frivolous violation reports. Moving forward, any person found to be misusing HOA complaint procedures will face their own fines. Karen shot up from her chair. You can't do that. The president barely looked up from his notes. Actually, we can. And we're starting immediately. Her face turned beet red. This is retaliation. This is accountability, Karen, he corrected, flipping through a stack of papers. Speaking of which, we also reviewed your property records. And just like that, the moment we had all been waiting for arrived. It turned out Karen had been violating HOA rules for years. The very same woman who had spent all her time enforcing nitpicky, imaginary regulations on everyone else had been breaking some very real ones herself. She had never gotten approval for her backyard fence extension. She had unauthorized decorative lights on her porch. Yes, the same kind she had complained about when someone else had them. And the best part? She had an unpaid HOA fine from 3 years ago. The hypocrisy was delicious. Karen's mouth flapped open like a fish out of water. That's a mistake. Aye. The HOA president cut her off. We'll need you to settle that balance immediately, and we expect full compliance with HOA regulations within 30 days. Otherwise, he smiled, we will pursue further action. The entire room went silent. Then someone coughed. Then someone snickered. And then, as Karen stormed out of the room, red-faced and furious, the entire neighborhood burst into applause. But her suffering wasn't over yet. She had spent years making enemies. And now those enemies were done staying silent. Neighbors started reporting her. Suddenly, she was receiving complaints about her yard not being properly maintained. She was getting violation notices about trash cans left out too long. She was being scrutinized for every little thing she had once nitpicked about others. And to top it all off, someone, asterisk not me asterisk, made sure that every house on the block put up the biggest, brightest, most colorful Christmas lights possible that year. Karen had always hated festive decorations. She officially lost whatever was left of her sanity. For weeks, she was a wreck. She started avoiding people, stopped showing up to meetings. At one point, she even put her house up for sale, though it sat on the market for a suspiciously long time. The day the sold sign finally went up was the happiest day the neighborhood had seen in years. The HOA meeting that followed was legendary. Tom, ever the king of pettiness, raised his hand. So, do we throw a party? Linda leaned in, grinning. Oh, absolutely. And so we did. A Karen-free celebration. Every house strung up extra lights. Flamingos returned in full force. Someone even made cupcakes with little fondant clipboards on top. It was glorious. And as I sat on my porch that night, watching the peaceful, Karen-free neighborhood return to life, I realized something beautiful. The grass grew freely. The mailboxes stood tall. And best of all, I finally put a garden gnome on my lawn. Just for fun. A few weeks after Karen's departure, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Like a storm had finally passed, leaving behind nothing but clear skies and a collective sigh of relief. Without her constant clipboard crusades, people actually relaxed. Neighbors talked to each other more, Kids played outside without getting side-eyed for being too noisy. And best of all, no one woke up to ridiculous violation notices for things like existing incorrectly. Tom was the first to make it official. One morning, he walked out onto his lawn, stretched dramatically, and took a deep breath. "You smell that?" he called out. I raised an eyebrow. "A fresh-cut grass?" "No," he grinned. "That's the smell of freedom." And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Karen was gone. The reign of terror was over. Sure, the HOA still existed, but now? It actually functioned the way it was supposed to, keeping the neighborhood organized without someone weaponizing nonsense rules for their own personal vendettas. But the real cherry on top? The final poetic justice? Karen's house didn't stay empty for long. One afternoon, I noticed a moving truck pulling up, followed by a car rolling into the driveway. I grabbed my mail and casually wandered over, curiosity getting the best of me. A young couple stepped out, smiling as they took in their new home. They couldn't have been older than their late 20s. Tom appeared beside me, nudging my arm. "Well, would you look at that?" I smirked. Oh, Karen would hate this. And then, as if the universe wanted to deliver one last perfect moment, the new homeowner reached into his car and pulled out a bright pink flamingo lawn ornament. I swear, I almost teared up. Tom let out a low whistle. "Think we should tell them?" I shook my head, grinning. "Nah, let them enjoy it." And with that, I turned and walked back to my house. The grass grew freely. The mailboxes stood tall. And the neighborhood? Finally at peace.